Hey, good morning. How y'all doing? Y'all doing okay? You know what a drama queen is, right? A lot of the ways that students and teachers that are experiencing each other by the virtue of how we communicate with each other, what we're communicating with each other in codes, right? Genetic codes. And so that's what I do. I share what I experience. Now you experience what I'm experiencing by virtue of the communication that is frequency and code, right? So that's why I don't expect, and now we're back in expectations, I don't expect to have a lot of subscribers, and I figure most people understand why that is, right? Has everything to do with codes, has everything to do with activations, atoms that cycle, which are atmospherics, right? So when you have different levels of consciousness that are experiencing what they're experiencing in frequency, which is code activations, then their consciousness is operating at a higher level of frequency codes, which means they're running a more powerful what? Radio set. So you're a radio operator. You're running an antenna. Okay? So now we're into the language of DNA, which is the language of what? Antennas. Star networks. Right? Okay, so I figure most people out there understand what a dead energy network is, right? Dead energy, right? Dead energy. No soul connection to the source from which it all began, which is what? An eternal God. Or if you will, eternal source, right? The primal source, sound and light field. They come together to become what? One. One blast furnace to experience what? The eternal Holy Spirit of fire, which is eternal unconditional love. That's the highest state of awareness, right? So that means you're running the highest antenna. And that antenna is what protects everything that is within the all creation, within the universal and galactic template. That's essentially what a guardrail is, a guardian. A mother and father had become one in order to protect all the children that came after the one. Right? So you start with one, and then you got all the other ones, right? To experience zero, right? Perfect balance. And so that means you have access to the information, the visual, mathematical, geometric information, which is a graphical user interface, right? And so it gets interesting here by the stories that I tell by virtue of what I experienced being in this house. And particularly when it relates to dead energy networks, dead energy consciousness, right? Running a black hole. So it's pretty easy to know those that are running black hole states of consciousness and those that aren't, which is the difference between a live one and a dead one, which is called living energy, right? With a living magnet, with a living spirit, right? Integrated with a soul, operating a radio body, a radio set. A set of two, right? Pairs, right? Codes of instructions that are paired between negative and positive magnetic polarity. So if the poles are in checkmate, can't tilt the pole. That's what a polarity integrator does. That's what I do. So when you plug that into vortexes, dead energy vortexes. So if you look at a map of the planet, you realize that one of the largest dead energy networks, largest dead energy units of consciousness that exist, go to Lapahoihoi on a map. Look at Lapahoihoi on a map. Where am I? Lapahoihoi. It's not a coincidence that I end up going to particular geomagnetic locations in order to anchor to the magnetosphere the pressure-sensitive waves of information, which is visual, mathematical, geometrical user interface, all right? And particularly when it comes to a counter space move, right? Which is a dead energy move, right? In a checkerboard square. So you know that their B system doesn't work. It's a failed system. That's why there's fail-safe codes. Safe codes like a safety zone, like a bridge arc, a rainbow round table, right? The emerald round table, right? Circle of fires are round. You know, the circle of fire, the ring of fire, right? fire rings, blowing fire rings, breathing fire rings, right? Watching the expansion of those scalar waves of fire, which is breathing fire, breathing God's eternal spirit of fire. The one. The source from which it all began with one. Eternal, Holy Spirit of fire. It's on fire to do what? Gifting electrons. Now we're back to not holding one unit of consciousness, one electron, captive. No. So you can imagine what it's like when you think about the language of DNA, which is the language of communication, which is the language of frequencies. So you know what it means when you want to load an antenna, right? Load, remember Morpheus in the Matrix trilogy, talking to Neo? We can load any program that you want. So now we're in programmable matter codes, which are frequency. So folks that are aircraft pilots know what an aircraft radio is. That's a programmable radio. Program the frequencies in, now the antenna is running all those frequencies. So now all you have to do is load, right, into the assembly or build a cosmic level radio set, right, a radio body that is running an antenna. So now you got all the frequencies, which means you got all the codes, which means you got all the codes that represent all the colors, which represent all the colors, which represent all the codes, which represent all the codes that we can communicate. So now we're in that band and bandwidth, which is the width of the wave, right, that represent the speed ratio harmonic between each wave or each frequency that is different from the other, but they're in an equilibrium state from each other so that we maintain the balance of a radio star network provider. So that's a hub server. That's a state of consciousness that is a hub server. That's a powerful vortex. Right? So you know that the most powerful vortex to generate an increasing level of accelerating neurons is your heart. So what happens when you're using the nucleus of a living cell membrane as the means to blow holes in your own cell membranes? Neuron damage. Doing damage to the circuits, which is doing damage to the codes, which is doing damage to the radio set. And that becomes what? A dead energy system. A dying planet. A dying spirit. Right? And that becomes a death star. A death mirror. A dead energy mirror. That's artificial finite light. Running on bad codes, which is that failed design. Right? And that's called living in a hole. So it was interesting here as I share some of the drama that occurs in this house when you realize I was led to come here because I am here. Remember, I mentioned that. Wherever I'm supposed to be is where I'm supposed to be, whenever I'm supposed to be there, why I'm there, when I'm there. Right? So when you understand that between maintaining the balance in the poles, right, between positive and negative polarity, right, that when we make a move, and I'm here in La Poi Hoi, you shouldn't be surprised what else shows up here, right? So now you can experience that by virtue of the stories that I tell every day, how counterspace moves are made with a deadlight system, right? Is to counter the move that we make, right? Because now it becomes aware of where our energy is, okay, that is going to affect what? Transmute, right? What is that dead energy vortex? On the Big Island of Hawaii, which is the largest shield, crystalline shield volcano. What do shields do? Planetary shields protect the codes, protect the bands, protect the codes, which protect the frequencies, which protect the units of consciousness that are experiencing themselves running those codes, which is running those frequencies, that is running those radio frequencies, because they're running an antenna. So when you're running a cosmic level microphone as a monopole, a single pole, which is an eternal candle, right? That's an eternal star, which is the eternity of eternal unconditional love. So that's a live one. So that's a living antenna, right? One of God's neuro-ion messengers. So you know that they don't understand and they can't translate and communicate and receive the transmission or the frequencies and the codes by which they thus translate with their antenna or their biocomputer. But if they've been blowing holes and doing damage to their codes, and that means that the receiver doesn't have any way to do what? Read and write the codes and then translate it in the language that was programmed for them to understand what it is you're talking about, which means they're tone deaf. So what that means is that now we're into the art of communication. Now we're in the art of healing. So now it's like going back to baby talk. Do we understand baby talk? Nursery school. So let's start with the basic elemental commands, the basic elements of assembling a radio set, right? So it can communicate with living stars, which is mathematical and physical codes. The assembly, building a radio set, shortwave, UHF, all the rest of that, right? So you have high energy and low energy. So when you have high energy communicating to a low band unit, then they can't read, translate, thus experience a high band radio. Doesn't compute. Does not compute. Their computer cannot translate the language because they can't translate the math, which means they can't translate the codes. Okay? So that would be your non-repairables. Okay? So now we're back to repairables with codes, activating higher consciousness, which is activating higher frequencies, because the consciousness is able to what? Translate the frequencies, translate the codes. That means that their codes are activated so they can understand the language that you're communicating with one radio set and another radio set connected to a network. Dead energy networks, living energy networks. Living magnets, dead magnets. Right? So now we're into the fail-safe code, which is a stealth code, because they can't take a picture of the key, which provides the access to the lock, because the tumbler keeps swiveling like swivel heads. Which way you going? In and out, in and out. Log in, log out. Log in, log out. Because the flash sequences are flashing on and off so fast, you cannot take a picture. A deadlight magnet cannot take a picture of something that is experiencing eternity. Unless it was eternity. Now it's experiencing what love is. It goes on forever, which means that unit of consciousness is experiencing the eternal love of true God. Or, if you will, the eternal source, the first magician, the first sound and light magician. Right? So you can see what happens here, particularly with the lady that came in here. So you understand, I was in here first. I got in here, remember, November, with Aaron, because I've known Aaron in the past, and Aaron is improving. Nathan and I had a very beautiful conversation yesterday. Now she's trying to get rid of Nathan out of the house, right? Doesn't want Nathan around either. She's trying to get rid of Nathan, trying to get rid of Aaron, right? She doesn't have any reason to come after me, but you understand how this works, because I certainly do in all the places that I've been where they want to kick God out of the building, right? Maintain that dead energy vortex, right? So the more little units of dead energy units that they have, that they can accrete together, if you will, as a larger formation of network dead energy consciousness, because they all have a relationship with each other. It's not based on friendship. It's based on food. They all feed on each other, feeding the vampire together, which keeps that vortex running. So it wasn't a coincidence that when I got here, all of a sudden she shows up. Right? That's called a counter space move. So she's on the warpath, using dead energy in which to do it. Right? If you were in this house, most people would be very, very, very uncomfortable. Nathan said that to me yesterday when he was out on the couch, fumbling through his his phone, and I gave him, I said, listen, I got a new phone, Nathan, so you and I aren't communicating in the windows, but I said, I gave you the channel for the Voyager materials and the Emerald Covenant because I know how much you love to do research, particularly about the Essenes, right? The Essenes, right? Yanahazi, right? Language of Mua, the Emerald Order, Emerald Round Table, Rainbow Round Table, Rainbow Circles, right? Emerald Circles, Emerald Fire, an Emerald Sun. Yeah. And so both Nathan and Aaron, I have worked with both of them, which I love with all my heart and soul for the last 3.5 years, and both of them have really it makes me cry. They're healing. And to see Aaron out in the sun yesterday, go grab an aluminum chair, just sit out and enjoy basking in the sunlight. Okay? Aaron very rarely used to do that. Aaron is no longer blowing as many holes in his Merkaba vehicle as he once was. And my intuition has told me, because of so many deep conversations that Aaron and I have had, that he was at one time part of a security team and got hit really hard, as so many indigos did. Now, I can't say that Aaron is an indigo, but he's trying to regain his emotional body. He's working at it. And so you can see that when Aaron's starting to heal, she doesn't want him in here anymore. Okay? See how that works? Why I came in here, why I reconnoitered back with Aaron. Now that Aaron is beginning to heal, right? Wanting to be more out in the sun. Nathan's beginning when this is how we heal each other. That's if we have the capacity to do that. Aaron has the capacity to heal, or I wouldn't be with him. Nathan has the capacity to be healed because all things become possible with an eternal love vibration. Because we love you all, no matter what happened to you, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from in the entire cosmos. So here we have yesterday, for example, I find out through Nathan that she apparently is doing everything she can to get rid of Aaron and doing everything she can to get rid of Nathan, right? So you understand how this works with a living central nervous system, right? And that's what you noticed last day and a half or so, the amount of, what tension is, right? Torque speed between an inverter and a torque converter, the tension that exists with a quad between two hemispheres, which is two planetary magnetic poles, okay? It's like a push-pull. It's like a tug-of-war, right? So you know what a tug-of-war is between negative and positive polarity, right? Now we're back to power trips between inverters and converters and what it's like to experience the push-pull, the tug-of-war, because it's not in balance. It's not integrated. It's not experiencing being one blast furnace. Okay, which means there's no polarity drama. Right? So yesterday, if you were coming into this house, that tension was so thick you couldn't cut it with a knife, which is an enormous amount of dense, dead energy in here. Okay? Because she apparently is using her room now as a brothel and dealing an enormous amount of heroin, crack, and all the rest of it, because her boyfriend, who is the son of an Arcturian, okay? And so without getting into the conversation about when you're a parent, you have any idea who the soul is that incarnated in here as a spiritual guide, which means just because that's your biological son, that's not your soul. Because the son that represents the seed that you exchanged and sent to a lab, and now you see a little boy that comes out of the girl who gave birth to who you seeded, okay? Are you familiar with guiding that soul? Because look what happened to that soul. It spent 10 years in prison, right? So you realize you don't have any control, regardless of who you are as a parent, what happens to that, whatever that is, right? But he mentioned to me that the other day, or not the other day, a couple weeks ago, my son has a pure heart. So I go, well, and this is now we're back into the art of communication. It's like trying to communicate on neutral ground so that that father does not experience a negative magnetic reaction state in him that gives him a reason to want to push a negative reaction state in me, because that's what I'll experience. This is the art of healing communication, which means when you're experiencing the higher frequencies and the higher codes of the consciousness because of what we're aware of, because you're running a higher state of awareness, because everything becomes transparent when you're experiencing eternal light, which is the eternal spirit of fire. That means everything becomes translucent, which means you can map read, which means you can read somebody else's mind. Okay? Which is reading all the codes that represent the frequency, which is the reading of the consciousness, which is the same thing as reading their mind. You're reading their codes. So you know that the template that they're running, which is the operator that's running those codes, that's what it is, which is running a library, which is a circulation library, because that's what Bob voltage is. It's you need power in order to run a circulation library, right? So you're a librarian, right? So are you a master librarian, which means you're in charge of your library. So you know how to run a library between two poles, right? Which is the same thing as flash sequences that are in and out so fast. That's like a blank slate. It's an empty library. Now you're going to fill it up with information. So you're filling up your library by what you experience based on the codes, which is the frequency, which is the mathematics, the geographical user interface. Because when you're flashing in so fast between outside time or pre-matter phase, precognition, as they say, because you're experiencing an eternal star, which is eternal unconditional love. So it's like starting over in the universe as if you're the first universe that has ever been, so that every breath of aloha, which is a breath of eternal spirit of fire, is now experiencing something new that it hasn't experienced before. That means you're always in now time, because the future's not here yet and the past is already gone. So we do not time loop nothing. We become aware of what they time loop, what's held in their circulation library that they're held captive to because they're holding it in memory. And if what they're holding in memory is based on beast technology, then they're held captive by the technology that was developed, which is a failed system. That's where they come to us. Tech support. We realized this was your template that you guys built, and we need help because now we're expendables, which means there isn't going to be anybody left to run your new world order, because now it's coming after you. So that means that all the vampires, right, now become food. And you can see that. There are examples of that all over the planet. So that's when the shields are activated, when the fail-safe code has been activated. Because I know for me, in 2016, I lit myself on fire. That's a full recalibration. That's what it is. And that's when I realized after that happened, hey, take one more breath of aloha. We're back to where we started. You want to create a new universe? Because that's exactly what it feels like. Because your antenna is so sensitive. Now it becomes almost impossible, but it's not impossible. When you realize that you're so sensitive, you don't want to leave a trace of having been there. As if what is there had no idea, because it can't read you, that you're even there. Which means you're in and out of there so fast, there isn't anything that is alive and living in that realm that ever knew, because it can't capture and hold in memory what it experiences through you. As if you didn't exist. So it's not aware of your presence. Because your state of presence is eternity. That's an eternal presence. That's God's, the one true God of eternity. That is the eternal presence of an eternal God, which is the eternal source from which it all began, which is the center point of every sphere of light that is in perfect balance. Particularly when you get into pie charts, right? in the axial tonal lines of communication within that sun, within that sphere of light, right? Between two poles, right? So what happens last night is that I'm translating in the most easiest way that I know how to do that. Hey, you know the door? This hallway, this right here is a wall. Right on the other side of this wall is a freeway, which is an aisleway that goes out into the garage. So some folks love to go out in that garage during the day and sometimes late at night. Now, sadly, the door that goes out into that garage is a really heavy door, right? So that when you open it up and just let it fall back, it goes bang, and it rattles this wall. So you know what that does to the central nervous system, right? It begins to get on your nerves over time when it's like a Chinese water torture. Bing, ping, ping, ping. And so you realize that their state of awareness is not aware of the impact and the use of their energy that it has on another. Because their central nervous system, right, is not running a high enough level of sensitivity, which means their neurons. Because they're damaging all their neurons. So now you're experiencing something that's on a de-evolutionary scale of going back in evolution, which is implosion, rather than higher evolution of higher consciousness by virtue of its accretion level to experience the higher frequencies, which is the higher consciousness of communication. That's why they're deaf when I communicate with them. They don't understand. And so what you begin to realize is you experience the psychopathic behavior of an individual that does not have an emotional connection because it's running on lower bandwidth. So what that means is when you have something that doesn't care enough about itself, by what it's doing to itself, that's translated by what others experience through them, the care that they don't have any love for themselves, that they certainly are not going to communicate with others because their state of awareness is so low, they're simply not aware of it. Which means they lack the capacity on a motherboard to experience any living light because they're running on dead energy. That's a dead energy state of consciousness, otherwise known as the walking dead. So I have folks in the house that are basically the walking dead, running on dead energy. Because La Hoi Hoi has a very large dead energy complex number space, right? So I go out here during the day, just like I did a little while ago, anchor my feet, put the house, what's called a bubble wrap of pure love, right? To keep the energy in balance here, right? And do what we call a push. You know what a push is on a blackjack table, right? A push. Right? Because I've experienced this many times when they want to push that energy out, when the shield is up, right? Because that energy is less powerful than pure light is, running a planetary, galactic, and a universal shield, right? Particularly when you're on the largest DNA shield volcano on the planet. And why this particular DNA shield volcano was target number one, their stronghold. So those that are in the military understand what a strong point is, what a star fort is, and what it means to hold down the fort, which is to hold the shield, which is to protect the shield, to increase the level of a planetary shield, to protect itself from what? Intruders that want to break the shield, hack the codes, take it over. Because that's what they want. They want the codes. That's why they ran all their unlawful breeding experiments to get the codes. Which is why you have the history of wiping out those seedings. See? And why we're where we're at now, because I remember when I voted that failure was not an option. So we know that it's not an option by virtue of what we were able to do successfully, which was activate fail-safe NOMI code. right? And why 2016 was a very important year when it comes to 2017, and why I, for one, with a security team, came over here in January of 2017. Because the experiences that I had here in 2017 and 2018 were some of the most powerful experiences that I had, and what I was experiencing when we get to the intensity of the fire, which meant when you light yourself on fire like I did in 2016, and then that fire carries through coming over to this island. Now I'm anchored to this island after having lit myself on fire, which is a full phosphorus ignition, right? That's like igniting the eternal star of God's love to send the first seed to the first girl. It's really what it is. Which means, as I experienced it, it's like being the male orgasm of all creation that you're now experiencing. Because you don't ever want to be separated and having an eternal union, which is an eternal marriage with the proton side, if you will, or the girl side, which is the other side of the pole, which means both poles become one. That's God's seed. That's Adam's seed. That's the heart and soul of the atom, the crystal atom, the Christic consciousness from which it all began. Right? So then when I got here, I began to experience some of the most powerful and beautiful experiences, particularly here at Lapahoehoe, where I was so on fire, which is what's so beautiful to experience, is running around and kissing all the flowers, kissing all the trees, okay? Barefoot and putting both hands on the ground and kissing the grass and saying, thank you, thank you, thank you for your energy. We did it. We did it. You're on fire. That's right. You're on fire. And the only reason when she mentioned, and this is true, that we only use a fraction of our energy to run this here at this level. And why it became one of the things that she mentioned was as things that I've mentioned, being at 4 years of age and having this up and running as fast as I could, and why I focused a lot on what we call accelerated learning, and how I've mentioned before about it's like reverse engineering a future that you already know that you're going to experience. But in order to get there, you have to experience what you're going to experience in visual, mathematical, geometric codes, which you've got to go through in order to get where I am now. And I mentioned to you about how there are certain flags that I used to use in a video that I put up in sort of a short explanation of what Ashaya Diane talked about when she was relaying about how indigos, the indigo 1s, the indigo 2s, the indigo 3s, and the importance of being able to flag your journey, because there are certain points in geomagnetic location as like the way that time and density works, in which certain things are experienced, which is like flagging your timeline, because you realize you're right on schedule. You're right where you're supposed to be in terms of the speed at which we're experiencing what we're experiencing, which is the highest accelerator of learning. So you realize that at this level, nobody's going to understand you. Okay? And why she mentioned about schools, that the types of schools that need to be present for children like this are never going to be properly facilitated or provide a tech support function for indigos that are operating at that level. Okay? So when I realized when she was talking about that, okay, that very much described exactly how I was experiencing what I am, but I've shared with everybody else. Okay? But I perceive it and describe it differently because I don't describe myself using letters and numbers in the way that works by compartmentalizing myself or limiting myself to a name like an indigo or an Arcturian, because I realize that my energy is in everything. Because I experience eternity, which is eternal unconditional love. So that means you have the ability to tune any star. balance every pole system, right? So that means that you're simply a messenger from the eternal source from which it all began, which means that my energy can be in anything, right? Because you're running off an eternal star. So it's like, what do you want to experience next? Because you know how to light yourself on fire, you're experiencing the eternal spirit of fire. So when you're experiencing being the eternal spirit of fire, it means you can run anything. Right? Which means you have access to all the codes. You have access to the whole enchilada. What do you want to run next? How long you want to be in one of these? Want to go be a tree for a day? Want to be a giraffe? Okay. That's the beauty of that's why love is the most powerful magic. It's because when you have arrived to become a one, to experience being one with all creation, to experience being a manu. I'm a manu. Okay? Which is like having a father and a mother that experiences eternal unconditional love in order to protect the all creation, because that's the energy that it began with. That's how it works for me. Right? Which means I am equal unto all creation. Right? Because I'm gifting love to everything that is in that mirror, in my mirror. So everything that you are, I am, because it began with what I am. So there isn't any difference between what you are and what I am. It simply means that you're experiencing yourself in a different way than I do by virtue of the free will that you have as a free will spirit. And when you're experiencing being free because you have a living spirit, then you're a living sacred temple of an eternal God. Because it began out of what love is. Love was first. So everything that comes after what love is experienced by love. So love is in love with everything that love creates, that love experiences in its mirror, which is everything that is in creation. So after that, it simply becomes a map read of the consciousness level that another unit is operating at, and whether it's operating at an eternal level. Which means if it's not experiencing what eternal unconditional love is, we read it. Which means they're running a lower band. Which means they don't have the capacity to load that many frequencies that represent that many codes, which represent all the levels of consciousness that you can experience through your radio set. Here. So when she was describing in that particular workshop, right, by showing all the indigos, who the indigos were, the different race lines, the Anahazi, the founder races, the Anunnaki, how everything sort of comes full circle here, right? And how that all relates to why we're experiencing what we are right now on a NOMI planet that has a stealth code, right? Flash, right? Can't take a picture of the codes in order to make a duplicate key to gain access to the lock. The lock is changed because the key is changed. Because it's really simple. It's just like, hey, I got a key to the back door. Now I can get in. Now I can gain entry into that planet whenever I want. So now I got access to that server. Now I got access to that gate network. So then what happens is when that shadow being comes up to the house, somebody changed the locks. I can't get into that house. Nah. They're faster than we are. They changed the locks on us. So you have to be operating at the frequency from which that new key in consciousness is operating at. So you have to be operating at that level of consciousness to access the key code, to now run the code to open the lock. Otherwise, if you can make a duplicate of it, you can do the same thing the Anunnaki did when they made a duplicate of it. Right? Which is to intrude into somebody else's domain. And now we're back to control. Right? Soul capture, consciousness traps, to now run their machines, to now run their system. Because you're another source of energy that it can use to run it. So now your consciousness becomes the consciousness that is running their machines. That's right. That is against the law. That is against the law of one, which we do not hold energy captive. When that energy is free to be what it is, now you know who it is. because you're experiencing the frequency of something that is free, that was born free, because it was born out of what love is, because it began with that. That's biogenesis, and that's healing, which means any unit of consciousness that hasn't experienced being healed yet, we detect it. Which means we detect any loss of one electron because they're not experiencing the eternity of God's love, or if you will, the source from which it all began. They're not experiencing source, the primal sound and light field from which it all began, which is the original template, which are the original codes. So if you think of it from a genetic engineering point of view, it means that there are some genetic engineers that are running a higher accelerated speed of learning, and genetic engineer, in order to do what? Be faster than them and what they develop because of what they do with their unit of energy. That isn't in balance with the law of one, because they're not experiencing being one equal unto all they give love to. That we experience. See the torque speed differential? They're not as fast as us. Right? Because we came first. So that's what it means to be one. The first sound and light magician, which is an artist, which is a musician. So we play music. We play music together, which is called song and dance. The songs, the PSONNS, the songs, the language of music. Kamalohati, Mua. Have a great day. I love you all. Be good to yourselves.